Love lives here.
Good morning. So let's dive into Black History Month together, shall we? I'm a little more excited about it than you are, so let's try that again. All right, let's dive in this together, Black History Month together again, shall we? Yeah. There we go. That's the response I'm looking for. I mean, come on. Black history is everyone's history, yes? Yes, absolutely. So, I want you to imagine waking up every day in a world that tells you clearly and relentlessly who you're allowed to be. Your body is owned. Your movement is restricted. Your future is not yours to plan. And yet somewhere deep inside you, you refuse to accept that this is the truth of you and that this is the truth for you. So you sing. Not because life is easy, but because you are holding something larger than what you can see. You sing about rivers, you sing about home, you sing about freedom. And to the untrained ear, it sounds like longing. But underneath, it's strategy, memory, and vision. Following the drinking gourd was not poetry. It was direction. These were people rehearsing a future that did not yet exist. Holding freedom and consciousness long before it was ever written into law. That kind of singing doesn't come from denial, beloveds. It comes from a deep spiritual knowing that reality responds to consciousness. Before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. I'll say that again, and you're going to hear it a lot. Before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. That understanding, my beloveds, did not start here in the Americas. It stretches back thousands and thousands of years to ancient Kemet, also known as ancient Egypt, and the Egyptian philosophy, Egyptian theology, Egyptian cosmology, among others. So in ancient Kemet, people understood that the universe as an ordered, intelligent, and responsive universe. Let me say that again. People understood the universe as ordered, intelligent, and responsive. They named this order Ma'at, truth, balance, harmony, right relationship. Ma'at was not a principle. Ma'at was not some idea, some thought-up thing. It was a cosmic principle. To live Ma'at meant aligning your thoughts, your words, and your actions with the intelligence of the universe itself. Sound familiar? Kemet taught that consciousness shapes reality. Harmony is lawful, not accidental. Humans participate in sustaining cosmic order. Disorder comes from misalignment, not punishment. So these teachings were practiced for over 3,000 years until something came along called the Roman Empire began to erode these teachings, erode their practices. So 3,000 years is certainly long enough to call that a way of living, yes? Not just a movement, not just some passing fad in history, but it's actually a way of living, a way of life for a long period of time. Science of Mind, as written by Ernest Holmes, right, would later call this same thing consciousness is causative. Ernest Holmes said consciousness is causative. But yet, people 3000 BCE knew this. This is why when we talk about ancient wisdom and new thought, that those two things come together, because there is no new thought. It is a tapping back into and a newer understanding of this ancient wisdom. So different language, but same truth. Right, Vicki? Yeah. So today we're talking about groundbreakers. Spiritual pioneers that challenge the assumptions and expand possibility. So to be a spiritual pioneer is not to simply have new ideas. It is to refuse inherited assumptions about reality. It is to refuse inherited assumptions about reality. Ancient Kemet challenged one of the most powerful assumptions of the ancient world, that humans were merely subject to fate, the whim of divine punishment, the whim of the gods, right? But instead, Kemetic teachings insisted that the universe itself is ordered, intelligent, and responsive, that human beings participate in that order through Ma'at. And that was radical at the time. That was radical. What it meant is that your inner state matters. Truth is not arbitrary. Harmony can be practiced. Reality is not fixed. It responds. In other words, what you hold, how you speak, and how you act shapes what unfolds. Ancient truth, ancient wisdom. The dominant assumptions of slavery was clear and brutal. Your property, you have no future, and this is all there is. But African American spirituality refused that assumption at the level that it mattered most: identity. People did not wait for society to tell them who they were. They named themselves beloved, chosen, human, free in spirit. It's why spirituals spoke of crowns and homecoming and liberation. It's why faith gatherings centered on dignity, even when dignity was denied everywhere else. They weren't pretending that the circumstances that they were living in didn't exist. They were challenging the assumption that the circumstances had the final word. And that, my beloveds, is spiritual pioneering. What we teach here in Centers for Spiritual Living is much the same today. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your history. You are not your current limitation. You are not what happened to you. So before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. And we see the same assumption challenging happening right here, right now, don't we? When communities across the country respond to violence and injustice, gathering and marching, mourning publicly, and demanding accountability, they are doing more than protesting policy. They are refusing an underlying assumption that violence is normal, inevitable, and acceptable. They're saying, this is not who we are. This is not the world that we consent to. And this is not political speech. This is consciousness asserting itself against normalization. Spiritual pioneers always do this. They interrupt the story that says, this is just the way things are. They expand the possibility of holding a different path long enough for it to become thinkable, then livable, then real. Groundbreakers don't start with answers. They start by questioning the assumptions everyone else has stopped questioning. Let me say that again. Groundbreakers don't start with answers. They start by questioning the assumptions everyone else has stopped questioning. And once that assumption breaks, a new future becomes possible. Every spiritual breakthrough begins the same way. Somebody, somewhere, stops agreeing with the lie. Stops agreeing with the falsehood. With the fake narrative. And so progress requires courage. Someone has to go first. Living Ma'at wasn't sentimental. It was disciplined. In Kemet, truth and right order weren't abstract ideas. You had to practice them. You practiced them. You aligned your speech with your actions with what you believed the universe was built on: coherence, balance, and responsibility. So courage meant this: I'm going to live from what I know is true, even when that knowing costs me something. Now bring that forward into Black history in the United States. In slavery, people had every external reason to surrender hope. And yet, over and over and over and over and over again, African Americans made choices that only make sense if you assume an inner conviction larger than circumstance. Harriet Tubman didn't just dream of freedom. She risked her life repeatedly to return and guide others out. No guarantee, no protection, no safety net. The courage wasn't only physical, it was also metaphysical. It required acting as though liberation was real enough to move toward before the world agreed. Freedom had to be practiced internally before it could be walked externally. During Reconstruction and Jim Crow, Black communities built churches and schools and mutual aid networks and businesses and credit unions and banks, often under the threat of terror, because they refused to allow the dominant culture to define what was possible. This was go-first energy, creating a structure for a future that was not guaranteed. Science of Mind, Centers for Spiritual Living, says that we do not wait for conditions to prove our good. We move from a deeper conviction, an inner yes, and then our actions align with that yes. Progress requires courage, because someone always has to step into reality before it looks reasonable. The protests following the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy demonstrate exactly this truth. In Minneapolis and across the country, people are stepping into public consciousness even without clear outcomes. Protesters, labor unions, faith leaders, and everyday citizens have taken to the streets in brutally cold weather, demanding accountability and structural change after these federal agents murdered 2 civilians. Thousands have marched, held vigils, and coordinated strikes, including the general strike in Minnesota, to assert that what happened was not acceptable and must be addressed. You see, people aren't waiting for permission for the situation to be safe. They're acting on a collective sense of what is right before it is settled into policy or law. Much like the enslaved spirituals held freedom in consciousness before it existed in law. That's a living example. This is a living example of vision before manifestation, courage before outcome, and collective consciousness activating change. When communities rise up, not because it's guaranteed, but because dignity is non-negotiable. They're embodying the same courage that spiritual pioneers have always shown, acting from an inner conviction of what is right before the world agrees. Before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. So Black innovators and leaders shape culture in absolutely amazing transformational ways. They always have. In Kemet, the culture carried spiritual instruction. The culture carried spiritual instruction. Art, story, poetry, architecture. These were ways of training consciousness. Culture and art, ways of training consciousness. We have it in our own vision of a world that works for everyone, our own global vision, where art and culture is restored and takes its rightful place. Why? Because it is training us in consciousness. You see, culture is not decoration. It carries meaning. It holds our collective consciousness long enough for it to become action in the world. African American culture did this in some of the most creative and resilient ways in human history. Consider spirituals, gospel, blues, call and response, and other Black artistic art forms. These were not simply music or entertainment. They were carriers of a collective meaning that shaped how people saw themselves and the world when the world told them to doubt their own worth. A spiritual like Wade in the Water wasn't simply a tune, it was a declaration of identity. We are free in spirit, even if our bodies were in bondage. It was repeated consciousness which shaped a community over time until it became a shared reality. Spirituals just weren't songs to feel better. They were community-held consciousness. And they did at least three things at one time. They named a reality bigger than the present suffering. When people sang about crossing water, reaching home, or going to a promised land, they were holding an identity that contradicted the system that claimed that they were property. Second, they created an emotional regulation and resilience together. Call and response isn't just a musical style, it's a spiritual technology. It says, I don't carry my faith alone, we carry it together. And the third thing is sometimes these spirituals carried coded meaning. Not every spiritual song is a literal map, but some songs focused and functioned as signals, timing, warning, encouragement, and they were shared in plain sight. In our terms and New Thought terms, this is thought held in feeling and practice, then becoming form. The culture itself creates a container for the good that you want to see. And so we see this parallel today in how people across the country are responding to the recent tragedies. Artists and songwriters have begun creating music in response, like Bruce Springsteen's Streets of Minneapolis, a protest song written and released almost immediately after the killings, capturing collective grief and calling for justice. Protest art, chant, vigils, signs, images, online videos. These are ways that people are creating culture around a shared vision of justice. even when institutional pathways feel slow or resistant. And that's exactly how Black innovators have historically shaped broader cultural consciousness. They live the vision before it appears. Culture becomes evidence of something higher than the current conditions. And this is how transformation happens. It's not only marches or policy arguments, it's a shared imagination of a different world that insists on being seen, heard, and lived into reality. Centers for Spiritual Living, New Thought, Science of Mind, teaches that thought impresses itself upon experience, especially when thought is held with feeling and repetition. A spiritual song repeatedly becomes memorized consciousness. An affirmation continuously repeated becomes memorized consciousness. It becomes a collective inner atmosphere where courage is normal and hope is practiced. You see, the civil rights movement didn't rise only from political strategy. It was carried in spiritual community. Church basements, mass meetings, songs sung together, sermons that framed justice as sacred. And that is culture shaping history. Shared meaning becomes shared action. And likewise, today's civic culture, the vigils, the protest songs, the collective actions, are ways that people are holding a different consciousness in the public square. That they're saying, we will not accept death without accountability. We will not accept violence without justice. And this shapes a broader conversation about policing, federal power, community care, and what a just society should look like. The current protests also show how culture and collective meaning become a transformational force in public life. When people chant and march, memorialize lives lost, form human banners, and hold candlelight vigils, they're creating a culture that carries consciousness forward. The signs, memorials, chants, artwork, and community gatherings are not just expressions of anger or grief. They are shared narratives that frame how communities see themselves and what they're willing to stand for. So the claim isn't Black culture changed everything as just some vibe that's cool to say, that's some statement that's really cool to say. It's true. Black communities held and transmitted disciplined inner reality through song, story, communal practice until it produced an outer movement. That is the consciousness becoming culture. That is thought becoming form. And again, before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. So we honor those who have come before us, who have opened the doors that we now walk through. In Kemet, honoring ancestors mattered. The past was alive, and it was always guiding the present. And this is true of African American culture today as well. And here at Riverside Center for Spiritual Living, we are part of a living lineage. Reverend Dr. Ernie Forks was the first African American minister at Riverside Center for Spiritual Living. He was a groundbreaker in this community, not just by position, but by his consciousness too. He once said, "We live in a world of events, and our lives are affected by these events because of the way that we see them. People are to us the way that we perceive them. And as long as you perceive someone as a problem, you must remain in the circumstance so that you can be right about them. It is only when you allow people to be as they see themselves, without judgment, that you are free yourself. This is straight up science of mind. It's straight up Kemet ideology. Reality is not shaped by events, but by perception. Judgment binds us. Consciousness frees us. Dr. Ernie was teaching the same truth as Kemet all those thousands of years ago, that alignment begins within. And then we had Reverend Mary, and we had Reverend Lee as well, and we'll be sharing about them as well in the coming weeks. These beloveds, these ancestors, these beloveds who went before us, didn't just open a door. They modeled how to walk through it, and to walk through it awake. So you and I, my beloveds, we each carry a pioneering spark. And now the question comes home to us. What wants to be imagined here before it exists? What wants to be imagined here, right now, before it exists? What good is asking to be lived now before it's guaranteed? And so before change becomes visible, it must become conscious. Groundbreakers don't wait for the road to appear. They move because they trust the map. The same spirit that moved ancient civilizations, sustained enslaved people, ignited cultural transformation, and shaped this community is alive right here and right now in us. So I invite you now to go to the tables and let's have some conversation around this. Who are the pioneers that shaped you? What might Spirit be calling you to lead? And how can we make space for new kinds of leaders? So I invite you to the tables. Grab your coffee, grab a snack, make room, share your names. Let's have a convo. All right, my beloveds, I'm back at the podium here. Just letting Jason know where I'm at. So, your homework for this week, tomorrow, your homework for, okay. All right. Or, for others, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is this week, do one small thing that nobody asked for. Something that makes life better for someone else. And let that act be an act of trust in the unseen good. And then post it in our Facebook group, Table Facebook group. Share it in our Morning Table Facebook group so that we can celebrate that with all of you as well. So you're just going to do one small thing that nobody asked for that will make life better for somebody else. Don't do something that nobody asked for, that nobody cares about, that makes their life harder. There's plenty of that. Do something that makes life better for one person. So, this morning we honor Kemet. We honor our African American pioneers, and we honor our African American ancestors who went before us here at Riverside Center for Spiritual Living. And now, my beloveds, we have been named. This community was never meant only to inherit doors that others have opened. We are meant to open new ones. So, may we know that Spirit is trustworthy. May we act knowing that good is real, so that others may follow. And so it is. So I invite our practitioners and core council to please stand and surround the space. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do prayer a little bit differently today. In fact, I'm going to invite everybody to stand. And let's do prayer today as a call and response. Are we good with that? Yep. So I will share, you've heard it enough today, but let's really anchor it and embody it. This is the idea of memorizing the consciousness, of bringing the consciousness, of embodying the consciousness. So I'm going to say, before change becomes visible, and you will respond, it must become conscious. Okay? So let's try that. It must become conscious. One more time.
It must become.
Okay. So before change becomes visible. Before change becomes visible.
It must become conscious.
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 And so it is. So
it
something
is.
wonderful is happening through me right now.
Something wonderful is happening through me right now.
It is this thing called love.
It is this thing called love.
Love is in my mind.
Love is in my mind.
Love is in my body.
Love is in my body.
Love is in everything I do.
Love is in everything I do.
I am it.
I am it.
I share it.
I share it.
I receive it.
I receive it.
And I move love forward.
Go forward.
Because
Because
love lives here. Happy Sunday.